The morning Cornelius Whitlock walked into the First National Bank of Stonebridge City, every conversation stopped. Not because he announced himself. He never did. It was the way he moved, measured, unhurried, like a man who understood that the world would wait for him. His dark coat was pressed with surgical precision. His eyes, grey as the December sky, pressing against the bank's tall windows, swept the room once and settled on nothing in particular. That was the thing about Cornelius Whitlock. He looked at everything. He focused on nothing, and somehow that made every man in the room feel as though they were being evaluated and found slightly lacking. He owned the steel mill that employed half of Stonebridge City. He held the mortgage on the other half. The railroad that cut through the valley to the north bore his family name on 3 of its original contracts. He had never once, in living memory, raised his voice in public. He did not need to. Stonebridge City did not simply respect Cornelius Whitlock. It organized itself around him, the way rivers organize themselves around stone, not out of affection, but out of the simple understanding that the stone is not moving. The head clerk, Mr. Alderman, appeared at his elbow within seconds, ledger already open, voice already low and efficient. They spoke near the mahogany partition that separated the bank's public floor from its private offices, their exchange brief and transactional. Whitlock signed 2 documents without appearing to read them, not out of carelessness, but because his lawyers had already reviewed them twice and he trusted that system completely. He nodded once. Mr. Alderman retreated with visible relief. It was in that moment, that unremarkable pause between one transaction and the next, that Cornelius Whitlock noticed her. She was standing at the far end of the teller's counter, waiting. That alone was unusual. Women of consequence in Stonebridge City did not wait in public lines at the First National Bank. They sent their husbands, their attorneys, their fathers, or their household managers. They did not stand at the counter themselves, portfolio in hand, chin level, waiting with the particular patience of someone who has been made to wait many times before and has decided that this time will be the last. This woman had no one with her. She was dressed well enough, a grey wool coat buttoned cleanly to the throat, well maintained but worn at the cuffs, in a way that told a careful observer it had survived at least 2 winters already and was being asked to endure a 3rd. Her posture was composed. Her hands, folded over a small leather portfolio on the counter, were completely still. The teller was speaking to her in that particular tone men at bank counters reserve for situations they have decided are inconvenient before they have fully understood them. Miss Winfield, he said her name like it was a minor clerical error. I have explained this already. The account remains frozen pending resolution of your father's estate. There is nothing I'm able to do for you today. I understand the account is frozen, she said. Her voice was even, not soft, not aggressive, even in the way a well-built bridge is even. It holds weight without announcing it. What I'm asking for is not access to the account. I'm asking for a certified copy of the original property deed attached to the Winfield filing of 1891. That is a matter of public record. You have had my written request for 3 weeks. These things require time, Miss Winfield. 3 weeks is not a timeline, it is a delay. She opened the portfolio with practiced efficiency. I have the reference number issued by this bank. I have the written acknowledgement signed by your clerk on the 4th of October. I'm not requesting anything beyond what the law already entitles me to receive. The teller blinked. The line behind her had gone very still. Cornelius Whitlock had not moved from his position near the partition, but his attention had shifted. A small involuntary sharpening, the way a man pauses mid-thought when he hears an argument he was not expecting to be made well. The teller excused himself, disappeared through a side door, returned with a supervisor who carried the particular posture of a man accustomed to resolving situations by repeating official positions with greater firmness. The supervisor repeated, nearly word for word, everything the teller had already said. He added the phrase institutional protocol twice and I understand your frustration once in a tone that made clear he did not. Dorothy Winfield listened to all of it without interruption. When he finished, she placed a second document on the counter beside the first. This is the relevant statute from the 1889 Filings Code, she said quietly, and this is the legal opinion prepared by Whitmore and Associates, whom I consulted this past Tuesday. If the bank elects not to produce the deed today, I will be filing a formal regulatory complaint by Friday of this week. I thought it was appropriate to give the bank the opportunity to resolve the matter before that step became necessary. The supervisor picked up the document, read it in silence, set it down. He said nothing for a long moment. Behind Dorothy, someone in the line shifted their weight. A man near the door exhaled, not in frustration, but in the quiet way people exhale when they have just witnessed something that surprised them. Not a dramatic scene, not raised voices, something quieter and more effective than that. The room was very nearly silent. Cornelius Whitlock set down his pen. He walked the length of the bank floor slowly, without urgency, hands loose at his sides. He stopped 2 feet from the counter. He did not look at the supervisor. He looked at the woman. "Winfield," he said, not a question. A fact being confirmed. She turned. She was not beautiful in the manner the women of his social world were beautiful. That composed, expensive, deliberate quality that came from long practice and considerable investment. She was something less constructed and more direct. Dark eyes that had clearly spent more time observing than being observed. A face that showed evidence of thinking rather than performing. A stillness about her that did not read as nervousness. It was patience, which was different from nervousness in every way that mattered, and considerably less common in a room full of men who were watching her. "Mr. Whitlock," she said. She recognized him without theater. No visible flutter, no excessive deference, no performance of surprise. Just recognition, a single composed nod. He looked at the supervisor. The look lasted approximately 2 seconds. It communicated nothing in words and everything in implication. "Give her the document," he said. "Sir, the standard protocol for estate-related, give her the document." The certified copy of the deed appeared within 4 minutes. Dorothy Winfield signed the receipt in a careful hand, placed the deed inside the portfolio with the same quiet efficiency she had brought to everything else, closed the clasp. Then she looked at Cornelius Whitlock directly. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't need me," he replied. It was not a compliment. It was an observation delivered in the same flat, precise register he used for contracts and weather. You had already constructed the argument. The outcome was a matter of time. Something passed across her face. Not gratitude exactly, not surprise. A kind of careful recognition. The look of a person who is unaccustomed to being seen clearly and is deciding in real time how to respond to it. "Then why did you intervene?" she asked. He considered this for a moment longer than she expected. "Because it was taking too long," he said, and walked back to his partition. Dorothy Winfield stood on the stone steps of the First National Bank for a moment before she drew on her gloves. The wind came down the main avenue of Stonebridge City, cold and uncompromising, carrying the familiar undertone of the mill, that low, rhythmic percussion of iron and fire that had underscored every morning of her life in this city since childhood. It was the sound of Whitlock steel, though no one called it that in conversation. Everyone simply called it the mill, the way you call a river by its direction rather than its name. It was simply the thing that was always there. She had the deed now. But beneath it, in the portfolio, behind the statutory citation and the legal opinion and the clerk's acknowledgement, were 4 other documents she had not mentioned. Not to the teller, not to the supervisor, not to the man with the grey eyes who had watched her from across the room, with an attention she had not anticipated and was not yet sure how to account for. 4 documents her father had kept, carefully and deliberately over the course of 11 years working inside the Whitlock mill. Records of decisions, copies of orders, figures that did not match the public filings on file with the state treasury. Her father had been a quiet man, a careful man. He had believed until the end that keeping those records was enough, that documentation was a kind of protection, that truth preserved on paper retained its power indefinitely. He had been wrong about that, wrong in a way that had cost him everything, and had left his daughter standing on the steps of a bank in December with a leather portfolio and 4 documents that could, if read by the right person in the right moment, bring down the largest industrial empire in the Northern Valley, or destroy her entirely depending on which way the weight fell. She snapped the portfolio shut. The mill hammered in the distance, steady, indifferent, permanent. She walked into the wind. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at her boarding house on Calloway Street. The envelope was heavy stock, no return address, but the seal on the back was a pressed W, angular, unadorned, the kind of initial that belongs to a man who considers ornamentation a form of imprecision. She opened it at her writing desk, in the grey light of a Tuesday morning, with the particular calm of someone who has been expecting a letter they are not certain they want to receive. The handwriting inside was spare and direct. No pleasantries, no social architecture. It read, "Miss Winfield, I am told your situation regarding the estate remains unresolved, and that the matter extends beyond the deed you recovered last month. I have a proposal that may be of mutual benefit. I am available Thursday at 2 o'clock. If you choose not to come, I will understand and will not write again. C. Whitlock. She read it twice. Then she set it face down on the desk, stood and walked to the window. Outside, Stonebridge City moved through its morning with the mechanical certainty of a city that believed it knew exactly how things worked and who held the weight of them. She picked up the letter a third time. Thursday, 2 o'clock. She already knew she would go, not because she had no other options. She was working on other options, carefully and methodically, the way her father had taught her to approach every problem that could not be solved quickly. She would go because the man had watched her win a small, invisible battle in a public room and had said without softness or flattery that she had not needed him. In her experience, that was not how powerful men spoke to women they intended to dismiss. She folded the letter, placed it beneath the deed, closed the portfolio. Outside, the mill kept its steady rhythm, iron on iron, fire on cold air, the sound of a city that did not know yet that something was about to shift inside it. Thursday arrived the way difficult things often do, quietly, without ceremony, giving no indication of what it intended to cost. Dorothy Winfield dressed with care that morning, though she would not have described it that way to anyone who asked. She would have said she dressed appropriately. There was a difference, and she understood it precisely. Appropriate meant functional, composed, suited to the occasion. Care implied anticipation of something she was not yet prepared to name. She wore the dark blue dress, the one with the clean collar and the small buttons down the front, that had belonged to her mother and had been taken in twice since. It was not fashionable by the standards of Stonebridge society. It was, however, serious, and seriousness, she had learned, was a more reliable form of armor than fashion. She arrived at the Whitlock building at 7 minutes before 2 o'clock. She had calculated this deliberately, not early enough to suggest eagerness, not late enough to suggest carelessness. 7 minutes was the arithmetic of a woman who understood that every small detail in a room like this one would be observed and interpreted by someone. The building stood at the corner of Merchant Street and the Northern Avenue, 4 stories of dark stone, functional and enormous, with the particular quality of architecture that is not trying to impress you but succeeds anyway, simply through scale and solidity. The lobby smelled of coal heat and polished wood, and the faint metallic undertone that clung to everything in Stonebridge within a mile of the mill. A young man at the reception desk took her name, disappeared briefly, and returned to escort her to the second floor. The office at the end of the corridor was not what she expected. She had expected grandeur, display, the visible accumulation of a powerful man's self-regard, portraits, trophies of industry, the decorative evidence of decisions that had changed the shape of things. She had been in rooms like that before. Her father had taken her once years ago to meet a mill supervisor whose office had been full of them. Cornelius Whitlock's office contained a large desk, 2 chairs, a wall of bookshelves that appeared to have been organized by subject rather than appearance, and 3 tall windows that looked north toward the valley. On the desk, a lamp, a ledger, an inkwell, and a single file folder placed at a precise right angle to the desk's edge. No portraits, no display. Just the tools of a man who considered thinking the primary occupation of the room. He was standing when she entered, which she noted without showing that she noted it. "Miss Winfield," he said, "sit down. Not please sit down. Not welcome. Just the sentence, delivered as information rather than instruction, the way a man speaks when he is accustomed to being obeyed and has stopped adding social decoration to the fact." She sat. He sat across from her, opened the file folder, did not look at it. "Your father worked in the Eastern Division of the Whitlock Mill for 11 years, he said. "He died in February of this year. The estate has been in legal suspension since March due to a disputed notation in the property filing. You have been attempting to resolve that dispute through proper channels for 8 months. The channels have not cooperated." "That is accurate," she said. "The reason the channels have not cooperated," he continued in the same flat, factual tone, "is that the disputed notation involves a signature that one of my former managers placed on a document he was not authorized to sign. Resolving the notation properly would require that manager to acknowledge the unauthorized action. He has declined to do so. His attorney has advised him to continue declining." Dorothy kept her face composed. This was more than she had expected him to say, more than she had expected him to know or to acknowledge knowing. "You were aware of this," she said. It was not an accusation. She was simply confirming a fact. "I became aware of it in September," he said. "My legal department brought it to my attention, as part of a larger review of the Eastern Division's filing history from that period. And you did not resolve it then? No. He said it without apology, but also without evasion. There were larger legal considerations in motion at that time that made immediate resolution inadvisable. Those considerations have since been resolved. She held his gaze for a moment. Mr. Whitlock, I appreciate the clarity, but I would like to understand why you wrote to me rather than simply having your legal department contact mine. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, a kind of recognition, the same fractional sharpening she had seen at the bank, that involuntary quality of attention that appeared when something exceeded his expectation. You don't have a legal department, he said. I have Whitmore and Associates on retainer for $40 a month, which I have been managing by taking in transcription work since April, she said calmly. The principle stands. He was quiet for a moment. The reason I wrote to you directly, he said, is because the resolution I have in mind is not a matter for legal departments. He placed a second document on the desk beside the open file, pushed it toward her. She looked at it without touching it. It was a contract, a formal one drawn up on Whitlock Industries letterhead, with all the structural architecture of a document that had been prepared by someone who knew exactly what they were constructing and had done so deliberately. She could see that much from 2 feet away. I will resolve the estate dispute, he said, fully and permanently. The notation will be corrected. The manager's signature will be addressed through internal proceedings that will not require your participation or your attorney's. The property will be released to you within 30 days. She waited. In exchange, he continued, I am asking you to enter into a formal arrangement, a contractual partnership. Documented, structured, and time-limited. 1 year. The room was very quiet. Outside the 3 tall windows, Stonebridge City moved through its Thursday afternoon without any awareness of what was being said 2 floors above the Northern Avenue. You are proposing a marriage contract, she said. I am proposing an arrangement, he said. The legal structure of marriage provides the most effective framework for what I need. I require a woman of credible social standing and demonstrable intelligence to fulfill specific public and representational functions over the next 12 months. I am in the middle of a consolidation negotiation with 3 Eastern Railroad partners. The social dimension of those negotiations requires a counterpart, someone who can hold a room, manage a conversation, and not be managed by the room in return. He paused. I watched you at the bank, he said. You understood the legal framework, constructed the argument cleanly, and did not lose composure under sustained institutional resistance. Those are specific qualities. They are relevant to what I need. Dorothy looked at the contract for a long moment. Then she looked at him. And what do I receive beyond the resolution of the estate? She asked. He opened the file folder, placed a second sheet beside the contract. A monthly allowance sufficient to cover your boarding, your legal retainer, and a reasonable additional sum. Full social access during the arrangement period, which will matter, practically, given the circles these negotiations require. And at the conclusion of the 12 months, a property settlement in your name, independent of any future claims. You have thought about this carefully, she said. I think about everything carefully. Then you have thought about the fact that I might say no. Yes, he said. I considered it the most likely outcome when I wrote the letter. I wrote it anyway because the alternative was leaving a resolvable problem unresolved, and I find that personally disagreeable. There was something in that sentence, something so precisely, accidentally honest, that Dorothy felt it land differently than anything else he had said. Not warmth, not charm, just the unguarded truth of a man who had stopped performing a long time ago and had perhaps forgotten that other people still were. She looked at the contract again. She thought about the 4 documents in her portfolio, the records her father had kept, the figures that did not match the public filings. She thought about 8 months of bank counters and form letters and supervisors who said, these things take time, with the confident authority of people who have never needed things to move quickly. She thought about $40 a month and transcription work and the blue dress that had been taken in twice. I have one condition, she said. He waited. The arrangement is contractual, and I honor contracts completely, she said, but I will not be directed. In any room, in any conversation, in any situation where I am acting as your counterpart, I act as myself, not as a performance of what you think the role requires. If that is acceptable, we can discuss the terms further. He looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is exactly the quality I need. He pushed the contract another inch closer across the desk. She did not reach for it immediately. She looked at it, at him, at the window and the grey sky above the valley, and the thin column of smoke rising from the mill in the middle distance. Then she picked it up. She read every line, all 4 pages, in silence. While he waited without visible impatience, which itself told her something. She turned to page 4, read the final clause, set it down. "You included a termination clause," she said. "If either party materially breaches the terms, the arrangement dissolves and the property settlement is forfeited." "Yes, define material breach." "Deception," he said. "Specifically, withholding information that is directly relevant to the business interests protected by this arrangement." The word hung in the quiet room. Dorothy kept her expression steady. Her hands, on the desk beside the contract, did not move. "That's reasonable," she said. She picked up the pen from his desk, signed the document on the indicated line, set the pen down. He signed below her name, closed the folder. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I'll have the estate matter resolved by the end of next week," he said. "My housekeeper will arrange the formal transition to the house on Callaway, the larger property, not the boarding house. You'll want the space for the next year." "That's not necessary," she said, standing. "I manage well in smaller spaces." "I'm aware of that," he said. He stood also, which she again noted. "It isn't about necessity. It's about the appearance required for the arrangement to function. The railroad partners will conduct inquiries. Those inquiries will include your address." She understood. "Very well," she said. She picked up her portfolio. The clasp was cool under her fingers. Inside it, behind the deed and the legal documents and the contract she had just signed, the 4 papers her father had kept for 11 years sat in perfect, undisturbed silence. The word deception was still in the room. She could feel it. She walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped. "Mr. Whitlock, Miss Winfield, when you say you find unresolved problems personally disagreeable," she said, "do you mean problems in general, or specifically the kind that involve other people's costs?" It was a direct question, perhaps more direct than the moment called for. She asked it anyway. He considered it with the same unhurried seriousness he appeared to bring to every form of thinking. "I have not," he said slowly, "historically made that distinction." She nodded once. "That's worth knowing," she said, and walked out. She was 3 blocks from the Whitlock building when she stopped walking. She stood on the corner of Merchant and Fifth, with the afternoon pressing cold around her and the portfolio under her arm, and she permitted herself, for exactly 30 seconds, to feel the full weight of what she had just done. She had signed a contract with the most powerful man in Stonebridge City. She had done it knowing she was carrying information that by the terms of that contract she was now arguably required to disclose. And she had done it because the alternative, another month, another year, another form submitted and delayed and ignored, the estate still frozen, her father's work still suspended in legal amber, was no longer something she could accept. She would find a way through. She always had. The mill hammered in the distance. She started walking again. The house on Aldermore Street was not large by Stonebridge society standards. By Dorothy Winfield standards, it was enormous. 3 bedrooms, a proper parlour, a study with south-facing windows that let in the kind of light she had not worked by in years, a kitchen that did not share a wall with 4 other tenants, a front door that was hers to lock. She moved in on a Saturday, which meant the street was quiet enough that no one made obvious note of it. The housekeeper Whitlock had assigned, a composed, economical woman named Mrs. Farrow, who appeared to communicate primarily through the efficiency of her actions rather than her words, had the rooms ready before Dorothy arrived. Linens pressed, coal in the grate, a note on the kitchen table with the household accounts already organized by category. Dorothy stood in the study for a long time that first morning, her portfolio on the desk in front of her, the south light falling across it. She did not open it, not yet. The arrangement functioned in its early weeks with the mechanical regularity of a well-run office. Cornelius Whitlock sent information. Dorothy processed it, organized it, and appeared with him at the occasions it required. He was precise about scheduling. A note delivered each Monday morning outlining the week's social obligations, the relevant names, the specific nature of each gathering, and what it was designed to accomplish. She read these notes carefully, researched the relevant parties through the public record and through the resources of Whitmore and Associates, and arrived at every occasion prepared in a way that she understood he had factored into his calculations when he wrote that first letter. She was good at it. Better, perhaps, than either of them had expected. At the first dinner, a private supper for 7 at the home of a railroad partner named Mr. Granville Holt, She had spent 40 minutes in conversation with Holt's wife, who was universally regarded as difficult and had left the woman visibly pleased. Dorothy had understood within the first 5 minutes that Mrs. Holt was not difficult. She was bored and she was smart, and no one in her social world had noticed the second thing because they were too occupied managing the first. On the carriage ride back to Aldermore Street, Cornelius had said nothing for several minutes. Then Holt mentioned his wife afterward. He seemed surprised she had enjoyed herself. "She's well read," Dorothy said. "She has opinions about the Pacific Railroad surveys that are more informed than her husband's. I expect she knows that." Another silence. "That was useful," he said. She looked at the dark street passing outside the carriage window. "I wasn't doing it to be useful." He did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice carried something she had not heard in it before. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of careful consideration, as though he was turning the sentence over to examine what it was made of. "I know," he said. She looked at him then. He was looking at the window on his side. His profile in the dark was composed and still, the way things are still when they are holding something steady. She looked away. They did not speak again until the carriage stopped. The estate was resolved in 11 days, exactly as he had said it would be. The disputed notation was corrected. The former manager, a man named Cartwright who had worked the Eastern Division's administrative office for nearly a decade, submitted an amended acknowledgement through his attorney. The property was released. The account unfroze. Dorothy received a formal letter from the First National Bank of Stonebridge City informing her that the matter had been concluded, written in the same tone of mild institutional authority that had obstructed her for 8 months with no acknowledgement of the obstruction whatsoever. She filed the letter. She did not dwell on it. But the resolution of the estate meant that the documents her father had kept were now no longer simply a private inheritance. They were active, because the corrected filing had required the bank to re-examine the Eastern Division records from that entire period, and some of those records, she now knew, overlapped precisely with what her father had documented. The question she had been living with for months had sharpened considerably. It was no longer, "Do these documents matter?" It was, "How long before someone else finds what my father found?" It was a Tuesday evening in the 5th week of the arrangement when things began to shift. She was in the study at Aldermore Street, working by lamplight, when Mrs. Farrow brought a card on a small tray. A visitor. Unexpected. The card read, "Mr. Thomas Alderman, First National Bank of Stonebridge." She recognized the name immediately. The head clerk, the man who had appeared at Cornelius Whitlock's elbow in the bank lobby that December morning. Ledger already open. Voice already low. She went downstairs. Alderman was standing in the front parlor with his hat in his hands and the posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was hoping it would be enough. He was perhaps 50 years old, with a careful indoor face and the slightly compressed quality of someone who had spent a long career being useful to powerful people and had learned to carry that weight quietly. "Miss Winfield," he said, "I apologize for calling without arrangement. I was not certain a formal letter would be appropriate for what I need to say." "Sit down, Mr. Alderman," she said. He sat on the edge of the chair, did not relax into it. "I was present," he said, "at several meetings in the Eastern Division Administrative Office during the period covered by your father's employment, meetings that involved the former manager Cartwright and others." She waited. "The amended acknowledgement that resolved your father's estate," he said, "was not the full picture of what Cartwright did in that office. The amended acknowledgement was selective. It addressed the minimum necessary to resolve the property filing. It did not address the underlying practice." "The underlying practice," she said. He looked at his hat. "There were figures, Miss Winfield. Figures in the division's quarterly submissions that did not correspond to the figures in the internal operating records. The difference was not accidental. It was systematic. And it was not limited to Cartwright." The lamplight held steady. Outside, Stonebridge moved through its evening. Dorothy kept her hands still in her lap. "How far up did it go?" she asked. Alderman was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know the ceiling," he said. "I only know the floor." And the floor was higher than Cartwright. After he left, Dorothy sat in the front parlor for a long time without moving. She was thinking about the 4 documents in the portfolio upstairs, about her father's careful handwriting on each one, about the fact that he had worked inside that division for 11 years and had understood at some point precisely what he was seeing, and had kept the records not as evidence to be used, but as protection, a quiet insurance policy against the possibility that the people he worked for might one day decide he knew too much. It had not protected him. She thought about the contract on the desk in the study, the termination clause, the word deception, and she thought about Cornelius Whitlock in the carriage on the way back from Granville Holt's dinner, looking at the dark window, saying, "I know," in a voice she had not been able to fully categorize since. She went upstairs, opened the portfolio, took out the 4 documents and laid them on the desk side by side under the lamp. She read them the way she had not allowed herself to read them since her father died. Not as an inheritance, not as a burden, but as what they actually were. Evidence. The question was no longer whether to act. The question was whether the man she had contracted herself to was above the floor Alderman had described, or the ceiling. She found out 11 days later, not the way she had expected. She had been attending a Thursday luncheon at the home of Mrs. Carver, one of the social obligations from Whitlock's Monday note, described simply as railroad partner wives, informal, 2 hours. When she overheard a conversation she was not meant to hear, she had stepped into the hallway outside the dining room to retrieve a wrap she had left on the coat table, and the door to the adjacent sitting room was open 2 inches. Not enough to see inside, but sufficient. 2 voices, male. The second voice she did not recognize. The first belonged to a man named Prescott, who was Granville Holt's attorney, and had been present at 3 of the social occasions she had attended with Cornelius over the past weeks. "Whitlock doesn't know about the Eastern Division audit," Prescott's voice said. "Cartwright's amended filing closed that door before the bank's internal review could go deeper." "And if it opens again?" the second voice said. "It won't. The original records from that period were consolidated into the General Archive 2 years ago. Accessing them now would require a formal request through the Railroad Commission, and no one at the Commission is going to initiate that without cause." "And the Winfield woman?" A pause. Short. The kind of pause that precedes a sentence that has been considered. "She got the deed," Prescott said. "That's all she was after. She's not a threat." Dorothy stood in the hallway without moving. She was not a threat. She had the portfolio upstairs at Aldermore Street, with 4 documents in her father's handwriting that constituted the most direct available evidence of what Prescott had just described as safely buried. And Prescott, Granville Holt's attorney, was sitting 20 feet away from her, in a room she had entered twice in the past month as Cornelius Whitlock's formal counterpart, discussing the same records as though she were a resolved problem. She picked up her wrap, returned to the dining room, sat down beside Mrs. Holt, resumed the conversation about Pacific Railroad surveys with a composure that cost her more than she showed. That evening, she sat at the desk in the study for a long time. She had 2 things she now understood with complete clarity. The first, the figures her father had documented were real, they were systematic, and they extended well beyond Cartwright into the financial infrastructure of a railroad consolidation that Cornelius Whitlock was currently negotiating on behalf of his own industrial interests. The second, Cornelius Whitlock might genuinely not know, or he might know everything. She did not yet know which, and until she did, the 4 documents on her desk were simultaneously the most valuable thing she owned and the most dangerous. She thought about the termination clause, withholding information directly relevant to the business interests protected by this arrangement. She thought about her father standing at his desk in the Eastern Division office, writing careful numbers in a careful hand, believing that documentation was protection. She thought about what it had cost him. She opened the portfolio, placed the 4 documents inside, closed the clasp. Then she took out a single sheet of paper and wrote a short note, not to Whitmore and Associates, not to Thomas Alderman, to Cornelius Whitlock. "I need to speak with you, not at a scheduled occasion, before the end of this week. There is something you need to know, and I am the only person currently in a position to tell you the truth of it. D. Winfield." She sealed it, set it on the corner of the desk to be sent in the morning. Then she sat with the lamp and the quiet house and the weight of 11 years of her father's careful record-keeping, and she stayed very still for a long time. Outside, the mill ran through the night, iron on iron, fire on cold air, the sound of a city that believed, entirely and incorrectly, that the weight of things was distributed the way it always had been. It was not. It was about to shift. And Dorothy Winfield, sitting at a desk in a house she did not own, in an arrangement she had entered out of necessity and was now navigating by something that felt, uncomfortably and inconveniently, like conscience. Dorothy Winfield was the reason it would. He came on Friday morning. No note in advance, no scheduled occasion, just a knock at the front door of the house on Aldermore Street at 9:30, And when Mrs. Farrow opened it, Cornelius Whitlock was standing on the step with his coat collar up against the January wind, and an expression that told Dorothy, the moment she saw him from the top of the stairs, that he had already begun to understand that something was wrong. She brought him to the study. She had arranged the 4 documents on the desk the night before, in the order her father had compiled them. Chronological, precise, the way her father did everything. She did not sit. Neither did he. "I sent you a note," she said. "I received it Wednesday evening," he said. "I spent Thursday verifying something before I came." She looked at him. "I pulled the Eastern Division operating records from the General Archive," he said. "The consolidated files from 1889 through 1893. My legal department had flagged a numerical inconsistency in the Railroad Commission's preliminary audit report last autumn. I had set it aside pending the consolidation negotiations." He paused. "I should not have set it aside." The room held the particular silence of 2 people arriving at the same truth from opposite directions. "My father documented it," Dorothy said. She gestured to the desk. "For 11 years. These are his records. The figures, the dates, the names of the authorization signatures. It is not Cartwright alone. Cartwright was the mechanism. The instruction came from Prescott. And the consolidation you are currently negotiating, the Eastern Railroad Partnership, Granville Holt is a direct beneficiary of the arrangement those figures protected." Cornelius looked at the documents. He crossed to the desk and picked up the first one. "Read it in full," set it down, picked up the second. She watched his face as he read, that composed, still face she had been studying for 2 months, and she watched the precise moment when the full architecture of it became clear to him. It was not dramatic. It was a very small tightening around the eyes, a breath that came out fractionally slower than the one before it. He set down the 4th document. "Holt knew," he said. "Yes. And Prescott managed the concealment." "Yes. I heard him say so directly at the Carver luncheon last month. He said you did not know about the Eastern Division audit. He said the Winfield matter was resolved." She kept her voice even. "He was wrong about the second thing." Cornelius stood at the desk with his hands flat on the surface, looking at her father's handwriting. "You have had these since before you signed the contract," he said. "Yes." He looked up. She held his gaze without flinching. "The contract includes a termination clause, withholding information directly relevant to your business interests. I'm aware of that clause. I'm aware of what these documents represent under its terms. I'm telling you now directly and completely, because it is the right thing to do and because my father kept these records for 11 years, hoping that the truth would eventually be worth more than the risk of telling it." She paused. He was not wrong. He was only early. Cornelius did not speak for a long moment. The mill ran in the distance. Cold light came through the south-facing windows and lay across the desk and the 4 documents and the space between them. "He worked in that division for 11 years, Cornelius said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, and he kept these records the entire time, from the beginning. He understood what he was seeing within the first year. He did not know what to do with the knowledge, so he documented it and kept it, and believed that keeping it was enough." She looked at the papers. "It cost him everything. I am not prepared to let that cost be the end of the story." Something moved in Cornelius Whitlock's face. Not sentiment, not performance. Something quieter and more structural. The look of a man encountering the weight of a consequence he did not cause and cannot undo, and is deciding, in real time, what kind of person he intends to be about it. He straightened, picked up the 4 documents, squared them carefully against each other, the way her father would have done. "I am dissolving the Eastern Consolidation," he said. "Holt and Prescott will receive formal notice today. The Railroad Commission will receive a complete disclosure filing, including these documents and the archive records my legal department pulled yesterday. I will instruct Whitmore and Associates to prepare your father's records for formal submission as primary evidence." He set the documents down. "Your name will appear as the source. I want to be clear that you understand what that means socially, in this city, in the short term." "I understand it completely," she said. "It will not be comfortable." "Comfort," she said, "has not been the primary organizing principle of my life for some time." He looked at her directly, fully, the way he had looked at her across the bank floor 2 months ago, except that now there was nothing neutral in it. It was the look of a man who has spent a long time evaluating things and has arrived at a conclusion he was not expecting and is not sure what to do with the arrival. "The contract," he said, "I know. The termination clause is yours to invoke," he said. "You withheld the documents by the strict terms of the agreement. I am aware of the strict terms." "I am not invoking it," he said. "I want you to understand that clearly. I am not invoking it." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she asked. He picked up the documents one more time and then set them down with a finality that was not about the papers. "Because you came to me," he said. "Before I had the full picture, before you knew what I had found in the archive. You wrote that note and you arranged these documents on this desk, and you stood here and told me the truth at direct personal cost to yourself." He paused. "That is not a breach of the contract. That is the only thing that makes the contract worth having." Dorothy looked at the south light on the desk, at her father's handwriting on the 4 pages, at the man standing across from her, who was not what she had expected when she read his first letter, and was not what she had expected when she signed the contract, and was not, she understood now, what she had been preparing herself to manage. "The arrangement ends in 10 months, she said. "Yes. And the property settlement stands regardless." "Yes. It was never conditional on anything except the completion of the year." "You will complete the year," she nodded. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she picked up the 4 documents and handed them to him directly, and he took them from her hands, and that transfer, that small, deliberate passing of her father's 11 years of careful record-keeping from her hands to his, was the most honest thing that had happened between them since the first morning in the bank. "I'll have my legal team contact Whitmore by this afternoon," he said. "I'll be available." He walked to the door of the study, stopped. "Miss Winfield." She looked at him. "Your father was right," he said. "The truth was worth more than the risk." He left. She stood at the desk in the south light for a long time after she heard the front door close. Outside, Stonebridge City moved through its Friday morning the way it always had. The mill running, the avenue busy, the bank open, the powerful men of the Northern Valley conducting their affairs with the confident certainty of people who believe the ground beneath them is permanent. By the following Tuesday, Granville Holt's attorney had received the dissolution notice. By Thursday, the Railroad Commission had the disclosure filing. By the end of the month, Prescott's name was in the public record in a way it would not recover from. The Eastern consolidation did not happen. The empire Cornelius Whitlock had been building took a different shape than he had planned. Smaller in one direction, more honest in its foundations, built on documents that a quiet man in the Eastern Division had kept for 11 years in the belief that truth, properly recorded, eventually holds. Dorothy Winfield kept the house on Aldermore Street, not because the arrangement required it, because it was hers. And in Stonebridge City, where the mill still ran and the bank still stood, and the powerful still moved through their world with the unhurried certainty of men who own the stone, the name Winfield was no longer a minor clerical problem at the end of a teller's counter. It was the reason the ground had shifted, and nothing in that city would be arranged quite the same way again.